Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We're going to be talking about personalization pointers and how to build a compelling business case for personalization, specifically using the Episerver platform. So, we're going to talk a little bit about how to build that plan and build the business case to get more investment in personalization. So, some of the things that we will cover today is I'll give you a little bit more information about me. We will talk about why personalization is important. I think we've all kind of heard some statistics about that, but want to focus in on why it's important to the customer experience and how you can use that to your benefit. Then we'll go into building the business case, which consists of the data, the plan, and the technology, and then some takeaways that are hopefully actionable for you. So, hi everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Jill Grzalski, Director of Digital Strategy at BrainJocks. So, I focus a lot on analytics and personalization and business goals and making sure that all of those things are aligned and building roadmaps for clients to progress with the technologies that they have. I am a lover of memes, so you'll see a few of those throughout this presentation. I am from Boston and I love Twitter followers, so please take a picture of that Twitter handle. Would love for you to follow me. So, getting into the meat of this, why personalization? As a strategist at heart, I always have to provide some level of statistics in my presentation. So, I've labeled this as the obligatory stats for this. So, just in terms of personalization, I think, as I mentioned before, we've all heard that personalization does have an impact, but really wanted to focus in on what it truly means for the customer experience and what we're seeing. As you can see, 75% of consumers like it when brands personalize messaging and offers them. That's something that has really come about due to the Amazons and the Netflix of the world, and it's really raising the bar for customer expectations. 90% of consumers find custom content to be useful. Whenever we are delivering relevant content based on previous behaviors or actions, that's always beneficial to the customer experience. And 78% of consumers believe organizations providing custom content are interested in building relationships. So this really speaks to a lot of the loyalty and building trust with customers, and personalization really helps to do that. Playing off that fact a little bit more, when we talk about loyalty and building trust and building relationships, it really begins by creating connections between a customer and your brand, and personalization and showing that you're listening to what people want and need, and then delivering something based off of that really does help to strengthen that connection between customers and the brand. So here we see 36% of customers commit to a brand because of personalized experiences. So not only is it a way to get people to your brand in the first place and to that first transaction, but it's also a way to really keep that relationship going over time. That being said, even though personalization has been a topic of conversation for a really long time, we're still seeing a fair amount of challenges to personalization in regards to barriers to entry. So this chart's just showing some of those obstacles people are facing when it comes to personalization. And if you kind of scroll up and down the list, you'll see that data is mentioned here a few times. And as we saw on the agenda, we're going to talk about the data and what that means for the plan. So the real question now is, how do we overcome those challenges and break down that wall between you and personalization? So when we talk about building a business case, and we had outlined this in the agenda, I think there are really three key parts to this, right? There's data, which is truly foundational to building a business case, and we'll talk through that. Then there's putting the plan together and then figuring out how you're going to execute your technology. So let's talk about the data. So to really get started with the data, you want to go ahead and perform a data audit to see what kind of data you do and don't have, right? Get a baseline on what data points you're collecting. Also, you want to make sure that your data is clean and usable. You also want to create a consistent reporting language for multiple systems. Chances are you probably have a few different reporting mechanisms and things that are collecting data, whether it's a CRM or Google Analytics, or if you have data built into your content management system, things like that, social media as well. You really want to figure out how to tell us one consistent story with all those data points. And then you also want to look at both engagement and site performance data. So a lot of times when we look at website performance, we're looking at visits and unique visitors, which is valuable data, but ultimately we want to understand engagement and where there are opportunities in the customer experience to improve. Are people engaging with content? If so, what content? And if they're not, let's take a look at those pages where content lives and figure out how we can optimize that page potentially for our customers or our users. It's also truly important to make sure that you have a single source of truth for your customers to enable a better customer experience. So because we want to progress to a point of personalization, we need to know that the customer data we're using is clean and that it's all in one area. It starts to get very messy if we're trying to personalize off of data in multiple systems and there's not one that's truly housing it. So a lot of times this will be your CRM, whether a Salesforce or a Dynamics. But regardless, whatever it is, it's just so important to make sure that you have that one single source of truth that is collecting data from the other systems, but is the one that you'll tap into when it comes to personalization. So once we have the data in place and we've kind of done that audit, we've figured out what we have, what we don't have, perhaps we have to go in and put in some more tracking. Once that's all taken care of, then we can start to put together the plan. And the point of the personalization plan is really not to do everything that's possible, but really to prove out personalization as a practice. The plan will allow you to start small. It's going to help you introduce new concepts and technology to your team. So if you have not been doing personalization before and no one's really experimented with it, the plan really helps you figure out, okay, where are we comfortable? Where are we not? How do we scale this? Things like that. The plan will also help you figure out how your customers are responding to personalization. We go into this making a fair amount of assumptions, and we can use the data that we collect to see if our assumptions are right or if perhaps our strategies need to pivot. And then, as I mentioned before, it really helps us figure out how to scale efforts in the future. So again, being able to put a plan in place that allows us to start small. We don't want to start personalizing for everyone out of the gate, but we do want to gather some lessons learned from that. So in terms of putting together your plan, we talked about the why, right? So the stats on the previous slides about personalization being important. We're going to talk about the who, so let's figure out the actionable audiences that we want to personalize for. The what is going to be, what content are we going to show and how do we figure that out? The where, in terms of the pages or the blocks that we're going to use for personalization. The when, exactly how we're going to trigger it, and then the how. And in our case, we're talking about Episerver, so the technology that will power that. So in terms of figuring out your who, this is an example worksheet that I've used with my customers to really understand different personas. A lot of times we see personas as just stale slides in a PowerPoint. And, we really do want to keep them fresh and to update them with data. And this worksheet really allows us to get that good baseline and really get alignment amongst teams on who are the people that we're interacting with. Most of the time we see about 3 to 5 personas to start for businesses, but there's definitely ways to slice and dice it and create more segments. But, again, because this is a personalization plan, you really want to prioritize who you're dealing with. So we have our goals and we want to identify for our users, what are their goals at work and what are their goals in engaging with your company? What are their behaviors at work or outside of work? What role do they play in the decision-making process? So, for B2B or B2C, there might be multiple people that are involved in making a decision and cutting the check. So kind of what role do they play and what information do they need to make their decision? What are some of the challenges and pain points that they face at work? And, what challenges might they have when interacting with your company? Do they require more upfront education that we need to account for? In terms of the needs, what are their needs at work and what do they need from you on their path to purchase or to engage? And then really kind of rounding that out with content types and CTAs. So figuring out what content would help this person make that decision or what calls to action will help progress them through their journey. So once we kind of know the who, then we want to take it down to the what in terms of what content they need. So for each persona that we defined in the previous worksheet, we can then go ahead and fill out or go through an exercise with Post-its that kind of answer some of these questions. So the purpose of this exercise is to take that persona and to figure out at different touch points in their journey, what questions do they have when they come to the site or when they're engaging? What are some of the potential pain points that they might face during that time in their journey? And then what content do they need that we can then serve up on the site and personalize to help them kind of get past those questions and answer them and alleviate any pain points that they might have. So I've done this in terms of a worksheet before, or if you have a number of stakeholders in the room, you can use Post-its to try and make it more interactive, but ultimately you want to document kind of all the information that you collect related to this. So once we have our what, then it really comes to the where. So where will personalization have an impact? And really trying to tie this back to the data, right? So what pages are most visited? A lot of times, obviously, that's the homepage. So that's a high traffic area that we could deliver personalization. You also want to look at perhaps pages with high visits and high bounce rates. That might be an indication that people want something on that page, but they're leaving because they might not have found exactly what they're looking for. So that might be a good page to deliver some personalization and experiment there. Pages with high value CTAs but low engagement are also really good opportunities for personalization. If there is a call to action that you really want people to convert on, but we don't see the data showing that, that's a good opportunity to maybe personalize the call to action or put supporting materials around it through personalization. And then also pages revisited across multiple sessions. So is there a trend in user journeys where people are coming back to a specific page? That's a good opportunity to then personalize and make sure that content is fresh and tailored. And then going into the when, so once we kind of have the who and the what and the where, now it's about figuring out what action or condition will trigger that personalization. And there's definitely different opportunities for this. And a lot of it's going to come down to your personas, right? What do they want to see? Where do we think it's going to be most valuable in their journey? You know, some thought starters for this are when someone completes a conversion, do we want to trigger personalization? If they viewed a certain page or a piece of content, does that trigger personalization? That's a great opportunity to keep content fresh. If someone's abandoned their cart, that's, you know, very typical type of personalization that we've seen oftentimes in email personalization, but it is something that we can do through content on the site. And a lot of times a good opportunity for when personalization should be triggered is when someone's visited the site multiple times, but hasn't completed that desired goal. So we can really use personalization to nurture them through their journey to get them to that primary call to action that we have for them. So once we have the data and now we have our documented plan, now the decision comes to how do we actually implement this? So in terms of how to make it work, you know, when we're talking about Episerver, there's really two ways that we think about it. So there's manual personalization and triggering, which uses visitor groups in the system to define a criteria that will then trigger personalization. So there's a ton of out-of-the-box stuff, and we'll talk about that in a second. And we can also set a fallback for users who don't match any visitor group. So there's still a level of tailoring that we can do from a manual perspective. There's also automated personalization. So this is automatic recommendations based on individual or group site behavior. So this is when we're thinking a little bit more large scale. We can define master and recommendation rules for personalization. Like I said, it is obviously more automatic, and we'll talk about some more of the details of this, but it's something that we think about more for larger scale personalization once we've kind of dabbled with it a little bit more. But both options are great for when you're starting out, and we'll talk a little bit more about each of them. So within Episerver, we have the opportunity to manually target content. So as I mentioned, they have a very robust visitor group functionality where we're able to use things like the number of visits or visited pages to really layer on very specific criteria for a visitor group. And what that's going to do is allow us to say, hey, if a user matches all this criteria, let's show them this now personalized piece of content on the homepage and the hero carousel, for instance. So using the out-of-the-box criteria, things like forms allow us to trigger personalization, things like that. And that persona worksheet that we walked through earlier allows us to determine how to build those visitor groups. So once we have 3 or 4 personas, we can see kind of where the similarities are, but what those differences are, and then use that to build the visitor groups to then target personalized content towards them. And then we also have automated personalization. So if you're familiar with Episerver, you know that they have extremely robust and mature personalization functionality when it comes to kind of machine learning and things like that. So the automated personalization here is definitely an opportunity for you to implement personalization for the first time. There's content, product, search, and email recommendations based on tracking that you get from the platform. There's also very, very great integrations with Google Analytics and CRM. So again, using that single source of truth for your customers to deliver personalization. And when we talk about the where of personalization in our plan, that's now applicable for product recommendations widgets as well. So beyond just that content piece, but delivering that personalized product recommendations. And again, using our personas in that worksheet to really determine how we can do that, and tracking criteria and recommendation strategies for what content we're going to deliver. So those are both of the options that we have. And again, it really comes down to kind of what your organization is comfortable with, how familiar is your team with the platform, things like that. You know, are you comfortable setting this stuff up? Do you kind of want to take it a little slower and have more control of it with manual personalization? Do you kind of want to plug and play with the automated personalization, see what you get? Again, it's a business decision and really based on what you're comfortable with. So to sum it up and putting it all together, to start building your business case for personalization, you want to tap into your data. You want to use that data to identify opportunities for personalization, see what's working on the site, see what has an opportunity for improvement, and use the data to kind of build a case and develop a hypothesis for the personalization that you want to deliver. Then you want to build a plan, right? Your who, what, where, when. For personalization, you want to go through all those exercises, document that, and again, prioritize. It's a plan, right? We want to start small and really figure out how to scale it. So you can definitely build a more robust plan, but figure out a way to make it kind of chunkable, right? And to break it out into smaller sections. And then implement with Episerver. So determine how you want to implement, whether it's manual versus automated. And then once you get that in, we kind of go full circle, right? To go back into the data to see, is our personalization working? What impact is it having? Do we need to pivot? Do we need different content? Things like that. So it all comes full circle here. So now you're probably thinking that you want me to summarize it and some actionable takeaways for you guys. So in terms of the takeaways, you want to make sure to start small and don't boil the ocean. Personalization is oftentimes an unproven practice, and you really want to show that it is something that's manageable. So using that plan and figuring out how to start small, how to get your team comfortable with it is extremely important. The second takeaway being data. It's always all about data. Make sure that you have the tracking that you want before you start personalizing. Make sure to use that data to build the case for personalization. Use the data to validate what's going on once it's implemented. All of that data is so core to a successful personalization plan. Third, you want to get to know your audience. So really take the time to go through and get the right people in the room to work through those worksheets. You don't have to use the one here, but something along those lines to really talk about the customer and their goals. You know, a lot of times we make assumptions about what our customers want. So going through an exercise of really putting on our customer hat really helps us tap into what they want. And also, if you have a chance and you can get the funding for it, or you have the time and resources, go ahead and do some direct customer research, because what better way to get to know your customers than to talk to them? Takeaway number 4 is to be nimble. Like I mentioned before, personalization is oftentimes an unproven practice. So things can kind of go in different directions once you get started. So being able to kind of pivot and shift based on what you're seeing, or if more people want to get involved, that's going to be huge, because there's no exact right way to do personalization. You really want to figure out what works for you and your organization. So being nimble is really key. And then results may vary. So personalization does have an impact, right? And we saw that in the statistics. But what's going to happen is you need to figure out what results you're going to see and what types of personalization are beneficial for your organization and your customers. So you can probably talk to a couple other people that have done personalization before, and they might see results that are very different from what you'll see when you implement personalization. So just remember that it really is about you, your audience, what works for your business, and not to just assume that results are going to be consistent across the board. So again, that also goes back to being nimble, being able to see what personalization is working, if it's having an impact, and being able to pivot on that and implement different personalization or different content if needed. And that's it. That's all I have for you today. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to join me. Definitely follow me on Twitter, check out brainjocks.com. And if you guys ever need anything, you can shoot an email. So thank you for your time.